The night I played my daughter's voicemail, I thought I was hearing a mistake until I realized she and her husband were planning to declare me insane, sell my home, and disappear with the money. That's when the quiet woman they underestimated vanished forever. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. We love knowing how far these stories of courage and justice are reaching. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 67 years old the day my life split clean in two. Until that afternoon, I still believed I had raised a daughter who loved me. I still believed that the long nights, the aching hands, the decades of scrubbing other people's floors had meant something. I still believed that a mother's sacrifices, if given with love, were safe from betrayal. I was wrong. It happened quietly, the way an earthquake sometimes begins with a tremor you almost don't notice. I was in the kitchen, making chamomile tea. The light from the window was soft, the kind of golden calm that makes you think nothing terrible could possibly exist in the world. The kettle whistled, the house smelled of lemon polish. My phone buzzed on the counter, one new message, from Melissa, my daughter. I pressed play. At first, the voice was familiar, comforting. Then it changed. Sharp, cold, a tone I had never heard from her before. Daniel, I can't take having my mother in this house anymore. She's a burden, always in the way. I found a place it's only $850 a month. In 2 weeks she'll be gone, and we'll finally live in peace. I thought I had misheard. My hand tightened around the teacup. The world went silent except for the hiss of boiling water. She went on, her voice steady, efficient, the voice she used when giving office instructions. The house is in her name, but Carla's helping us fix that. It's easy. A few forms, a few signatures. She won't even notice. Once she's in the home, we can start the renovations. Daniel's laughter cut through the air. And the insurance, it's in our name, right? If something happens to her, well, accidents happen. The teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Every sound in the world seemed to fade: the clock, the kettle, the birds outside, everything but the echo of their laughter. I replayed the message, convinced I must be imagining it. But no matter how many times I listened, the words were the same. My daughter, my only child, plotting my removal like a business transaction. Planning to steal the house I built with 30 years of work. Speaking about me as if I were an object, something to store away until it stopped being a problem. The kitchen light flickered and caught the reflection of the shattered porcelain scattered around my feet. In those fragments, I saw the truth of my life. Years of effort, of quiet giving, of believing that love protected you from cruelty. But love had become a currency, and I had been paying all my life without realizing there would be a bill at the end. I sank to the floor, the phone still in my hand. I could hear Melissa's voice repeating inside my skull, calm and cruel, explaining details like she was arranging a delivery. We'll tell her it's a medical appointment. Once she's there, it's done. The director already approved the room. She won't be able to come back. My throat burned. For a long time I didn't cry. I simply sat there trying to understand how something like this could grow in silence right beside me. Every smile, every visit, every "I love you, Mom," had been a rehearsal for betrayal. People say heartbreak comes from losing someone you love. They're wrong. The deepest heartbreak comes when you realize the person who says they love you has been planning your destruction. I looked around my kitchen, the wooden table I'd saved for years to buy, the curtains I had sewn myself, the photo of Melissa on her graduation day smiling in her cap and gown. I remembered how proud I had been that day, how I'd told everyone, my daughter made it because of hard work. I just didn't know it was my work she had built her future on. The kettle had stopped whistling. Steam curled into the air, fading like the illusion that my love had been enough. I wiped my eyes and pressed replay one more time, forcing myself to listen to every word, every laugh, until the disbelief turned into something else: clarity. They thought I was an old woman who wouldn't notice. They thought the years had dulled my mind and my courage. They forgot that the same hands that once scrubbed floors had also built the foundation of this family. They forgot that silence does not mean weakness. By the time the recording ended, I was no longer crying. I stood up, picked up the broken pieces of the cup, and placed them carefully in the trash. The same way, I would soon place every trace of their lies where it belonged. I stared at the phone still glowing on the counter. There was one truth pulsing on the screen. Voice message from Melissa, 3 minutes, 12 seconds. 3 minutes and 12 seconds, that was all it took to destroy a lifetime of illusions and to awaken a part of me I thought had died long ago. I don't know if you've ever heard your child's voice plotting your downfall, but let me tell you, there is no pain like it. It's a kind of death, but one you're forced to witness. And in that death, something else is born. Resolve. That afternoon, I realized that kindness without boundaries is an invitation to cruelty. That night, as I sat staring at the dark window, I promised myself something simple yet absolute. They would never see me as powerless again. If you're listening to this and wondering how an ordinary mother turned betrayal into justice, stay with me. The story you're about to hear will change the way you think about love, loyalty, and what a single determined woman can do when pushed to the edge. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel and help us keep telling stories like this. Your support gives us the strength to bring more real voices, more lessons, and more courage to light. Thank you for being here and for standing with us. Now, before we continue, let me ask you something to think about. It's a simple question, but it says a lot about who we are. If you accidentally discovered that someone you loved was secretly planning to destroy you, A. Would you confront them immediately, demanding the truth? B. Would you stay silent, collect evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike back? Tell me your answer in the comments, A or B, and let's see how many of you would choose calm strategy over instant confrontation. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Melissa's voice again, as if she were whispering from the dark corner of my room. By morning, I was no longer a mother but an empty shell filled with disbelief. To understand what that betrayal meant, you need to know the kind of life I had lived and how every thread of it had been woven around my daughter. My story doesn't begin with that voice message. It began nearly half a century earlier, in a small apartment that smelled of soap, coffee, and exhaustion. When I was 19, I found out I was pregnant. The father, Charles, was a man with easy promises and expensive lies. He swore we'd marry right after I finished the pregnancy, that we'd raise the baby together. One morning, he was gone. His parents slammed their door in my face when I went to look for him, saying their son wasn't going to ruin his future for a girl like me. I remember standing on that porch, the winter wind cutting through my coat, and realizing I was completely alone. My mother opened her door that night without asking questions. She just said, "We'll raise that child together." She sold her last piece of jewelry, 2 thin gold bangles, to buy me baby clothes and a crib. I can still hear the sound of the sewing machine at night, the rhythm of her hands working to provide for us. From her, I learned that love isn't loud, it's patient, invisible labor that no one applauds. When Melissa was born, it felt like a sunrise after a decade of night. I held her and thought, she will have everything I didn't. We didn't have much, but I made up for it with effort. At 19, I started cleaning offices downtown. $20 a day, sometimes less if the manager decided to dock a few hours. I'd come home with swollen feet and cracked hands that smelled of bleach, but every cent I earned went toward Melissa. I wanted her to grow up proud of me. When she was 5, she'd wait by the window and run to hug me, saying, "Mommy, you smell like lemons." That was the scent of the cleaning liquid I used, but she said it as if it were perfume. When she started school, I ironed her uniform so carefully it looked brand new, even though it was secondhand. I'd wake before dawn, pack her lunch, then walk her to school because the bus fare cost too much. The other mothers arrived in clean cars, wearing perfume and pressed dresses, while I stood there with work gloves in my pocket. I remember thinking, maybe she'll never feel small like I do. That was what drove me to erase my shame through her future. The years passed in the rhythm of labor: work, home, sleep, repeat. There were no vacations, no birthdays for me, just milestones for Melissa. When she turned 15, I worked extra shifts for 6 months to give her a proper celebration. The party cost $3,000, money I'd been saving to fix the roof that leaked every spring. But seeing her in that golden dress, her face glowing as she danced, made me believe the sacrifice was worth it. "Mom," she said, hugging me that night, "I don't know how you do it. "When I grow up, I'll give it all back to you, I promise." I kept that sentence like a treasure. When college came, I faced numbers that terrified me: tuition of $14,000 a year, books, fees, transportation. I earned $400 a month. I did the math, it didn't add up. But mothers don't surrender to arithmetic. I took out a loan using my house as collateral. I sold the engagement ring Charles had given me. I even sold my mother's sewing machine, the last connection I had to her. The day I handed Melissa her enrollment papers, I said, "You'll be a professional. You'll work in an office with air conditioning. You'll never have to clean anyone's floors like your mother." I remember the smell of the university corridor that day, polish and ambition. Watching her sign those papers was the proudest moment of my life. 4 years of sleepless nights followed. Every time she needed something, I found a way. Books, projects, outings, proper clothes. I'd eat bread and soup for a week just so she could go to dinner with her classmates and not feel poor. When she graduated, I sat in the back row of the auditorium, my heart bursting. She crossed the stage, her cap slightly crooked, and when they called her name, I thought, every blister, every hour, every humiliation, this is what it was for. She hugged me afterward, crying, "Mom, this degree is yours too. I'll take care of you now." When she met Daniel a year later, I saw how she looked at him and thought maybe God had finally rewarded her. He was polite, steady, worked at a factory as a supervisor. When he asked for her hand, I wept from joy, thinking she would have the stability I never had. They wanted a beautiful wedding, one that looked like the ones in magazines. I didn't have the heart to say no. $8,000 for the venue, $2,000 for the dress, hundreds for music and flowers. I took another loan, sold my last bits of jewelry, and told myself, she'll remember this forever. For a while I thought she did. They visited every Sunday. We'd eat roast chicken, watch TV, laugh. She'd slip a few bills into my hand, saying, "Mom, let me help you. You work too hard." I believed we had finally reached peace, that the circle of giving and receiving had balanced at last. I didn't know that peace was only the calm before a storm. When Daniel lost his job 3 years ago, they began asking for help, first small amounts, then larger, $1,000 for bills, $2,500 for a car, $3,000 for debts. I told myself that's what mothers do. They give until giving hurts. But slowly, things began to shift. Calls became shorter. Visits stopped. There were excuses, meetings, errands, busy weekends. When I phoned, she would say, "Mom, I'm in the middle of something." Or, "Can I call you tomorrow?" Tomorrow never came. I started noticing small cruelties hidden inside polite words. "Mom, you seem forgetful lately. Are you sure you're okay alone?" "Mom, that house must be too much work for someone your age." I laughed them off at first, thinking she was worried. I didn't realize she was planting a story of confusion, frailty, dependence. The truth was, I had built my entire life around a single belief, that family repays love with love. But that night, sitting in the glow of the television I had bought for her first apartment, I began to understand what that voice message really took from me. It didn't just steal my trust in her, it stole the meaning of every sacrifice I had ever made. All the nights I worked late, the meals I skipped, the years I spent waiting for her future to bloom, suddenly they felt like investments in an illusion. And yet, somewhere beneath the heartbreak, another voice spoke, the one that had guided me all my life, my mother's voice whispering from memory, "Evelyn, love your child, but never forget yourself." That sentence had once sounded selfish to me, now it sounded like prophecy. By the time dawn colored the window pale gold, I knew what I had to do. I would not crumble, I would not beg. I would gather every piece of proof, every receipt, every document. I would fight with the same endurance I'd used to survive poverty, abandonment, and exhaustion. The girl I had raised might have betrayed me, but the woman she betrayed was stronger than she remembered. That realization was the first spark of the fire that would soon consume everything built on lies. The days after that discovery passed like a fever. I moved through the house in silence, touching objects as if they might explain how everything had changed while I wasn't looking. The lamp beside the couch, the worn quilt on my bed, even the dented saucepan on the stove, all witnesses to a life that had once been ordinary and safe. I began to notice details I had ignored before. The unopened mail stacked neatly by the door, the unfamiliar handwriting on envelopes, the quiet way. Melissa's tone had shifted in recent months from affection to something that felt like management. It's strange how betrayal never really arrives out of nowhere. It leaves small clues, faint scratches on the surface of everyday life that only make sense when you look back. The first sign had come a year earlier, though I hadn't recognized it then. Melissa began offering to handle my paperwork. "You're always so busy, Mom," she said. "Let me take care of these things for you." I thought she was being kind. She organized my bills into folders, changed a few online accounts, and told me not to worry about anything. When I thanked her, she smiled the way people do when they're hiding something. After that came the questions. Subtle at first, then sharper. "Do you remember where you put the house papers? Mom, you mixed up the dates again. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" She said it with laughter, but the laughter didn't reach her eyes. At church one Sunday, she told the pastor's wife that I was getting forgetful. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding, though I felt heat rising in my chest. What I didn't know was that a story was already forming a quiet campaign to make me seem fragile, unreliable, dependent. Then there was Daniel. He had always been polite in a mechanical sort of way, but lately his patience had thinned. "You should think about downsizing," he told me one afternoon while fixing the back fence. "This place is too much for you." I said I liked my garden, the sound of the sea a few blocks away, the way the morning light filled the kitchen. He smiled, the kind of smile men use when they think they're humoring you. "We just want what's best for you," he said, hammering the last nail as if sealing a decision I hadn't agreed to. Little by little, I began to feel like a guest in my own home. Melissa would drop by and move things without asking, sorting drawers, labeling boxes, writing sticky notes. "Medicine morning, medicine night, water the plants on Tuesdays." She spoke slowly to me, as if I were a child. "Mom, you should let me handle your finances," she said one day. "You make mistakes." I laughed nervously, but inside something twisted. I wanted to believe it was love, not control. But love doesn't whisper doubts about your sanity. Love doesn't count your pills and rearrange your life while you're asleep. The next hint came disguised as kindness. She brought a man to the house, a doctor with soft hands and a rehearsed smile. "Just a routine checkup," she said. "They're doing memory assessments for seniors now, free of charge." He asked questions that felt too personal. "Do you ever forget where you are? Do you find it hard to handle money?" When I said no, he nodded as if he expected me to lie. He gave Melissa a paper on his way out, and I remember her folding it carefully, tucking it into her purse. Later, I'd find out it was the first piece of their fraud, a falsified cognitive report. The walls began to close in after that. My neighbor, Mrs. Henry, stopped by one morning to say she'd heard I wasn't doing well. "Melissa said you've been confused lately," she said gently. I smiled and changed the subject, but my hands were trembling. Even the pharmacist began asking if I needed help organizing my medication. Everywhere I went, I could feel their narrative wrapping around me like a net, an invisible story about a helpless old woman losing her mind. Then there were the papers. Melissa started bringing documents for me to sign: insurance renewals, utility forms, what she called routine authorizations. I trusted her. She'd sit beside me with her tablet open, explaining in her calm, professional voice. "Just a few formalities, Mom. I'll take care of everything." I signed them because she was my daughter, because love makes you blind, because I had spent a lifetime believing that obedience and gratitude were the price of peace. One afternoon, I noticed something odd. The deed folder that I kept in the bedroom drawer was gone. Melissa said she had taken it for safekeeping. A week later, a new set of papers appeared in its place, neatly bound. I opened them, expecting to see my name. Instead, I saw hers typed in the section marked beneficiary. When I asked about it, she said, "Oh, that's just a draft. Don't worry." The lie slid off her tongue like silk. What unsettled me most wasn't her deception, it was my silence. Somewhere along the line, I had learned to swallow doubt rather than confront it. Mothers do that. We protect harmony at the cost of our own clarity. Each time I felt something was wrong, I reminded myself of her laughter as a child, her tiny hand gripping mine. I told myself she was just worried, that I was imagining things. The truth was that fear had made me polite. There were small, chilling moments that revealed the depth of their plan. Once, I overheard Daniel on the phone saying, "We'll need to act fast before she changes her mind." When he saw me standing there, he hung up. "Just talking about the plumber," he said. Another time, Melissa suggested we look at retirement communities. She said it casually, stirring sugar into her coffee. "They're nice, Mom. You'd have company. People your age." I told her I wasn't ready. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The final straw came 3 weeks before the message. I woke up to find 2 strangers at my door, a social worker and a nurse. "Routine wellness check," they said, smiling. They asked about my health, my finances, whether anyone helped me with daily tasks. I answered as best I could, confused and embarrassed. When they left, one of them patted my shoulder and said, "Your daughter loves you very much." Only later did I learn that Melissa had requested the visit herself as part of her documentation. By the time the voice message arrived, the foundation had already been laid. Every seed of doubt, every whisper about confusion, every staged act of kindness had been part of the same story. The betrayal wasn't sudden, it was the climax of a long, quiet campaign, and the cruelest part was realizing how easily I had helped them build it. I had signed the papers, I had allowed the stories. I had trusted love to protect me from deceit. In those days before I confronted the truth, I learned the most painful lesson of all. Manipulation doesn't always come with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes wrapped in affection, disguised as care, delivered in the voice of your own child. By the time you recognize it, the damage is already done. But understanding that truth, as brutal as it was, became the beginning of my awakening. Because once I saw the pattern, once I faced the quiet web they had spun around me, I knew that love without awareness is a dangerous kind of blindness, and I would never close my eyes again. The night before I finally listened to the full message, I sat in the kitchen with the lights off. The only sound was the steady hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of a house still alive while its heart was breaking. I couldn't bring myself to replay it at first. I told myself maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe it was taken out of context. Maybe my daughter was venting frustration and not confessing cruelty. But when I pressed play again, there was no room left for doubt. The voices were clear, confident, deliberate. The sound of betrayal has a weight to it. You can feel it settling into your bones, turning every breath into proof that you were right to be afraid. Melissa's voice began softly, like she was speaking from another room. "Daniel, she's losing it. The confusion is worse every week. If we wait too long, she'll forget to sign, and then it's complicated." His voice followed, careless and amused. "We'll make it look like her idea. People believe anything about old folks once they start repeating themselves." She laughed, an unfamiliar laugh, sharp and knowing. "Exactly. And Carla's got everything ready. Once the doctor finalizes the report, we'll file for temporary guardianship. Then the property's ours. It's cleaner that way." Guardianship. The word hit me harder than any slap could have. They weren't just planning to move me out of my home. They were planning to make me legally invisible. I could picture it, papers filed in some quiet office, my name replaced by theirs, my voice erased by a line of signatures. I'd seen women lose their freedom like that before neighbors, church friends, widows who trusted the wrong people. They called it care. It was theft dressed as compassion. The message continued, each sentence carving deeper into the person I used to be. "The facility has a room," Melissa said. $850 a month, private, but small. They don't allow phones, less risk of her calling anyone," Daniel snorted. "Perfect. Once she's settled, we can start the renovation. That house is a gold mine. Carla said the appraisal came in around $480,000. He paused. "We could flip it in 6 months, easy." For a few seconds there was silence on the recording, just the faint clinking of glasses, the sound of 2 people celebrating. Then Melissa's voice again, quieter, like a dagger drawn close. "Don't worry, Daniel. I've handled her all my life. She trusts me too much to suspect anything." I stopped the recording, but the silence that followed was worse. I sat there, frozen, my hand trembling over the phone, the light from the screen flickering against the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Every moment of my life with her replayed in fragments. The night she was born, her first fever, her graduation, her wedding, the sound of her laughter as a child. It all collided with this new voice, the cold stranger speaking through my daughter's mouth. I felt sick. My stomach twisted and I pressed my hand against it, as if I could hold myself together. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I'd burned earlier, but now it seemed bitter, wrong, out of place. The air itself had turned against me. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled, and I sank back into the chair. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your sense of gravity. Everything you thought was solid begins to tilt. I played the last part again, almost against my will. "Once she's gone," Daniel said, "we'll have to be careful with the paperwork. The insurance still lists her as the primary, right?" Melissa replied, "Yes, but I've already filled out the change request. I'll get her to sign it next week. She never reads anything I give her." He laughed. "You're good," and she answered, softly but clearly, "I learned from the best." It was that last sentence that undid me, because I knew exactly who she meant. She had learned from me how to work hard, how to endure, how to plan. All those lessons I'd given her to survive the world, she had turned into weapons against me. I realized then that cruelty doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it's inherited, reshaped, reborn in the people you love most. I don't remember how long I sat there. Time stopped existing. I heard the old clock ticking in the living room, its pendulum swinging like a heartbeat I no longer trusted. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, a dog barked, life went on while mine dissolved quietly in that small kitchen. When the recording ended, the phone fell from my hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at the window. The reflection staring back at me was a woman I didn't recognize, gray hair uncombed, face hollow, eyes wide and dry. There was no sound except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low murmur of the world continuing without me. I remember thinking, this must be what death feels like when you're still breathing. I don't know how long I sat like that before a strange calm came over me. It wasn't peace. It was something colder, steadier. I thought about my mother again, the way she used to say, "The world tests your softness first. If you survive that, it will respect your strength." I realized that the woman in the window wasn't broken. She was being rewritten. So I replayed the message one last time, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I needed to memorize the sound of it. Every word, every inflection, every careless laugh. I wanted to know the enemy, and the enemy wore my daughter's face. I wrote down timestamps, names, details. I filled a notebook with the precision of someone gathering evidence, not memories. By dawn, the first plan had already begun forming in my mind. I would find out how deep their lies went. I would learn the rules of the system they were trying to trap me in. I would use their own arrogance against them, but before all that, I allowed myself one final moment of mourning. I sat by the window, watching the first light spill over the street, and whispered a goodbye to the version of Melissa I used to know, and to the woman I used to be before that message. That morning, I buried my illusions, and from their grave, something fierce began to grow. I didn't yet have a full plan, but I had clarity. They had taken my trust, but they had also given me something they didn't expect. Proof. Proof of their greed, their lies, their voices. Proof that love could rot, but truth could still be sharp enough to cut through the rot. As the sun climbed higher, I turned off the phone, placed it on the table, and said aloud to the empty room, "You wanted me gone. You'll regret underestimating me." My voice was steady, and for the first time in years, it sounded like mine again. I didn't realize it then, but those 3 minutes and 12 seconds of betrayal would become the foundation of my survival and the beginning of their unraveling. By morning, the house had fallen into a kind of accusing silence. Everything around me, the half-drawn curtains, the mug still marked by yesterday's lipstick, the wilted lilies on the counter seemed to ask the same question, "What are you going to do now?" For hours I sat in that chair by the window, listening to the distant noise of the neighborhood, trying to stitch my mind back together. Grief was still there, raw and restless, but something else had begun to stir underneath it, a thin, steady pulse of clarity. I knew the moment I pressed play on that recording that I could never go back to being the same woman. The helplessness that had held me in place for weeks began to crack, and in the space beneath it, resolve began to take shape. When the sun rose, I opened the closet and reached for the only piece of clothing that still made me feel like myself, the deep red suit I had worn to Melissa's graduation. I hadn't touched it in years. As I shook the dust from its sleeves, I remembered the way she had hugged me that day, whispering, "This is for you, Mom. You made me who I am." The irony felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but it also strengthened me. I put it on, buttoned it carefully, and looked at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked older, yes, but also sharper, as if the years had been sharpening her for this moment. The first step was simple. I had to secure what was mine before they could take it. I took the small notebook where I kept every bank address, every bill stub, every loan number, my life written in receipts and ink, and placed it in my bag. My fingers trembled as I locked the door behind me, but with each step toward the car, the fear began to fade. I had spent my entire life cleaning up other people's messes. Now I would clean up my own, but this time I wouldn't use a mop, I would use truth. At the bank, the smell of polished wood and cold air conditioning wrapped around me like an old memory. Nora Jenkins, the manager, looked up from her desk and blinked in surprise. "Evelyn, you're here early." I had known Nora for over 20 years. I trusted her because she had seen me at my poorest and treated me with respect anyway. "Nora," I said quietly, "I need to check something important. It's about my accounts." Her expression shifted when she looked at the computer screen. "Your daughter came in 2 weeks ago," she said carefully. "She brought a letter with your signature authorizing her to manage your funds. I assumed you approved it." My heart sank, but my voice stayed steady. "May I see that letter?" When she handed me the copy, I stared at it, my name written in a hand that tried too hard to mimic mine. The loops were wrong, the tilt too neat. It was a forgery. I remember the tremor in Nora's voice when she whispered, "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. What do you want me to do?" I straightened my shoulders, freeze every connection to her. From now on, no one touches a cent without my presence. Move all my funds to a new account, new number, new cards, new passwords. Today, it took an hour to complete, and when I walked out of that building, a different kind of strength was rising in me. Money wasn't what I feared, losing it was the evidence of independence. Outside, the winter air bit at my skin, but it made me feel alive. The next destination was the county clerk's office. My cousin Carla worked there, the same Carla I'd heard in the recording. My stomach churned as I drove, rehearsing the words I needed to say. When I entered the office, she looked up, startled, her hand freezing mid-signature. "Aunt Evelyn! What a surprise!" Her voice shook slightly. I could see guilt written across her face like a bruise. "I know everything," I said softly, pulling out my phone. "I heard your name in their conversation. I know about the fake medical reports and the forged forms, and right now, I'm recording this conversation." Her skin went pale. "Please let me explain." "Go ahead," I replied, "but remember that every word you say is being saved." She began to cry, the way people do when they realize the story they helped build is about to collapse. Between sobs, she admitted to printing falsified documents, changing signatures, and processing a draft transfer of my property title. She said she did it because she owed Daniel money and because Melissa promised no one would ever find out. I let her speak until she ran out of excuses. Then I asked for copies, every form, every email, every timestamp. She handed them to me, her hands shaking. When I walked out of that office, I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a witness, a plaintiff, and a survivor in the making. Back at home, the quiet no longer frightened me. I placed the papers in a neat pile on the table, next to the phone that still held the recording. I poured myself a cup of tea, not for comfort, but as a ritual of control. For the first time in weeks, I tasted calm. The pieces of their plan were finally in my hands, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. That evening, I called a lawyer recommended by one of the families I used to work for. His name was David Ford, a man known for handling complicated fraud cases. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, just enough to make him agree to see me the next morning. "Bring every document you have," he said. "We'll handle the rest." His tone was matter-of-fact, but beneath it, I heard something rare belief. Someone finally believed me. When I hung up, exhaustion came in waves, but I refused to let sleep take me yet. I sat by the window, watching the night stretch across the street. The lampposts glowed pale yellow, and for a moment I thought of my mother again, her steady hands sewing late into the night so I could have a better life. I whispered a promise to her memory. I won't let them erase me. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that confronting them directly would be useless. Words would only feed their narrative. Instead, I would speak the language they understood: proof, law, exposure. My revenge would not be rage, it would be order. I would strip their lies bare in the same calm way I used to polish mirrors until every stain disappeared. When dawn returned, I folded the red suit neatly and placed it on the chair. It smelled faintly of old perfume and courage. The fear that had ruled me for so long had burned itself out during the night, leaving only determination behind. I had lived my entire life cleaning, fixing, forgiving, but this time, I wasn't going to clean up anyone else's mess. I was going to make them face it. Before I went to bed, I wrote one sentence in my notebook, underlined twice. Tomorrow the fight begins. It wasn't anger that guided my hand, it was purpose. I knew that once I started, there would be no turning back. But I also knew something else, something Melissa and Daniel had never understood. You can rob a person of their possessions, their comfort, even their name, but you can't steal the spirit of someone who's already survived worse. That night, for the first time since the betrayal, I slept without fear. The next morning broke with a fragile light, thin and uncertain, as if even the sun wasn't sure it wanted to touch my house. I had slept, but it wasn't rest, it was the body shutting down after too much pain. When I woke, the red suit I had worn the day before hung neatly on the chair. The sight of it reminded me that grief had had its time. Now came something else. I moved with a strange steadiness, the kind that comes after you've accepted the worst. I made a list, just as I used to when cleaning other people's homes, each task deliberate, methodical, one small victory at a time. This time, the list was about reclaiming myself. The first step was to confirm what they had done to my finances. When I returned to the bank later that day, the world outside seemed sharper, louder the sound of tires on asphalt, the clink of coins at the teller's window, even the metallic scrape of the pen tethered to the desk. I had spent my life walking into places like this with quiet humility, afraid of wasting anyone's time. But now, humility had no use. I stood taller when I entered. The manager, Nora Jenkins, met me in her office with that polite smile banks reserve for old customers who are no longer profitable. "Evelyn," she said, "what can I do for you?" "Protect me," I said simply. Then I told her everything: the forged signature, the unauthorized transfers, the falsified letter. At first she looked skeptical, but when I placed the printed documents on her desk, her face changed. She scrolled through her computer in silence, eyes narrowing. Finally, she whispered, "You're right. Your daughter accessed your accounts last week. She changed your online password and requested a debit card mailed to her address." I felt the air thicken. Nora reached for the phone. "I'll handle this personally." Within an hour, she canceled the fraudulent card, froze all linked authorizations, and transferred my remaining funds, just under $9,000, into a new account that only I could access. Watching her type, I felt a power I hadn't known in years. It wasn't about the money, it was the realization that I still existed, that the system had not erased me yet. When she printed the new statement and slid it across the desk, I signed it with slow, deliberate strokes, the same hand they had tried to imitate but never could. When I left the bank, the sky had turned the color of slate. I walked several blocks before realizing I was heading toward the county clerk's office. My hands were trembling, not from fear but anticipation. Carla was there, I knew she would be, and I needed to see her face when she realized I was not the confused woman she thought I was. The hallway smelled of dust and printer ink, the air humming with the sound of filing machines. I spotted her behind the glass divider, laughing with another employee. The moment she saw me, the laughter stopped. "Aunt Evelyn," she said quickly, stepping out from behind the counter. "What a surprise." I took a deep breath. We both know it's not. I set my phone on the counter, its red recording light glowing softly. You've been helping them. I have their voices on tape, and yours is next. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I leaned closer. You'll either tell me the truth right now, or I'll let the police ask the questions instead. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her shoulders began to shake, and tears rolled down her cheeks. They said you'd never find out, she whispered. They said it was just paperwork. Paperwork that would have stolen my life, I answered. She nodded miserably. From her drawer, she pulled a folder thin, cream-colored, with the county seal embossed on the front. Inside were copies of the property documents they had been preparing, each stamped pending transfer. My name was listed as the grantor. The grantee was my daughter. Who else knows? I asked. The notary, she said. He signed off without checking IDs, and a doctor, someone named Henley, filed a cognitive assessment saying you weren't capable of handling legal decisions. Her voice broke. I didn't think it would go this far. I took the folder, closed it, and looked her in the eye. Carla, you're going to print me certified copies of everything in this file, emails, memos, timestamps. And you're going to sign a statement that these documents were falsified under pressure from my daughter and her husband. If you do that, I'll make sure the truth comes out the right way. She nodded, her hands shaking so hard she could barely type. When she finished, I took the papers and walked out without another word. Outside, the wind was rising. I stood on the courthouse steps, the folder pressed to my chest. For the first time, I felt taller than the building behind me. The sky opened, and rain began to fall in thin silver threads, soaking the red fabric of my suit. I didn't run for shelter. I let it wash over me, a quiet baptism in truth. By the time I returned home, night had already crept in. I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the forged signatures, the letters, the confession. It looked almost surgical, as if someone had dissected my life into legal fragments. Yet in that arrangement of lies, I saw the beginnings of my salvation. The evidence was stronger than rage, stronger than grief. I took out a new notebook and began to write. Each entry was dated, factual, unemotional, the time, the action, the name. Every small detail mattered now. Emotion could come later. Justice needed clarity. That night, I called attorney David Ford. His voice was calm, professional, carrying a tone that made me believe he'd seen darkness like this before. Bring everything tomorrow morning, he said. If what you're saying is accurate, we'll move fast. Don't confront them yet. Let the law do the work. I promised him I wouldn't, but in my heart, I knew I already had. After I hung up, I made tea and sat in the dark. The rain had stopped, and through the window I could see the reflection of my own face, older, yes, but steady. My mother's words echoed again. The world tests your softness first, then it demands your strength. For years I had believed that gentleness was my only virtue. Now I understood it had merely been the armor I wore until I remembered the steel beneath it. Before going to bed, I gathered the documents into a folder and labeled it Truth. I placed it on the nightstand where I could see it when I woke. That folder was more than evidence. It was my heartbeat printed on paper. Everything they had tried to take from me, my voice, my sanity, my worth was contained within it, waiting to speak in the only language they couldn't distort. Facts. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the quiet, "You taught me how to survive, Mother. Now teach me how to fight." The air felt lighter, charged with something that might have been hope. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I was waiting for it. The morning of the confrontation arrived without ceremony, quiet and gray, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I had woken before dawn, unable to stop my mind from rehearsing what was about to unfold. Every piece of evidence sat neatly in the brown folder on my kitchen table. The voice recording transcribed word for word, the forged letters from the county office, Carla's written confession, the fake cognitive report, the property transfer forms with my falsified signature. I had spent the night reviewing each one under the small lamp until the words began to blur together, but I knew every line by heart. The betrayal no longer hurt, it had hardened into focus. At 10 sharp, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a signal. I opened the door to see Attorney David Ford standing on my porch, his dark coat still glistening from the drizzle outside. Behind him stood 2 uniformed police officers and a notary public. The sight of them made my heart pound, not from fear, but from the strange, quiet certainty that comes when the truth is finally about to step into the light. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," David said, his voice calm but resolute. "Are you ready?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We stepped inside, and he placed the folder on the table. "They'll be here soon," he added. "When they arrive, let me lead the conversation." But I already knew I wouldn't stay silent. There were things a mother needed to say herself, and this was one of them. When Melissa and Daniel pulled into the driveway 15 minutes later, I watched them through the lace curtain. They looked ordinary, unbothered, unaware of the reckoning waiting behind my door. Daniel adjusted his tie like he was heading to a business meeting. Melissa was talking on her phone, laughing. The sound of that laughter brought back the recording in my mind, the same laugh that had filled my kitchen with poison. The knock came, light and casual. I opened the door. Melissa's smile faltered when she saw the strangers in the room. "Mom, what's going on?" I didn't answer. I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. The officers stood by the doorway, quiet but alert. David greeted them politely, then gestured to the chairs. "Please, have a seat." Daniel frowned. "What is this, some kind of ambush?" I turned toward the table, pressed a button on my phone, and let the recording play. "Daniel, she's losing it. The confusion is worse every week." The color drained from Melissa's face. "Mom, wait." I raised my hand. "No. You wanted to speak about me when I wasn't listening. Now you can hear yourself instead." The room filled with their voices, her calm cruelty, his careless laughter. Each word hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Melissa's eyes widened. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. When the recording ended, there was a long, terrible silence. David opened the folder and laid out the documents like cards in a game only he knew how to play. "These," he said evenly, "are certified copies of forged authorization letters, medical reports, and property transfers, all tied to your names. We also have a written confession from your cousin Carla, detailing your involvement and the payments she received for falsifying records." Daniel leaned forward, his voice rising. "This is absurd. You can't prove—" The lawyer interrupted him, sliding another paper across the table. "Her confession is signed, witnessed, and recorded. The county has already confirmed the documents were tampered with, and the doctor who signed the false evaluation, he's under investigation. Your messages with him have been subpoenaed." Melissa's breath hitched. She looked from the lawyer to me, her lips trembling. "Mom, we didn't mean it wasn't supposed to." "Stop." My voice surprised even me. It was steady, cold. "You meant every word. You planned every step. The only thing you didn't plan was that I would stop pretending to be blind." Daniel pushed back from the table. "You can't do this to your own daughter." "She did it to herself," I said quietly, "and to me." The notary recorded the conversation, every sound preserved. One of the officers stepped forward and handed them a document. "You're both being served with a preliminary restraining order pending investigation into financial fraud and conspiracy to commit guardianship abuse." Daniel's voice cracked into anger. "This is insane. We were trying to help her." David looked up sharply. "By forging her name? By transferring her property into your account? By taking out a life insurance policy in your favor?" The words landed like blows. Melissa began to cry, her hands shaking. "Mom, please, we just wanted stability. We were drowning in debt. I thought if I handled things now, it would save us later. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to," I repeated softly. "But you did. You didn't even hesitate. Do you have any idea what it feels like to hear your own child planning to erase you?" She sobbed harder, reaching out, but I stepped back. "No, Melissa. Love without respect isn't love. It's control. You taught me that." The officers escorted them outside. Daniel muttered curses under his breath. Melissa looked back once, her face pale and streaked with tears. I watched from the doorway, my hands trembling, but my heart strangely calm. When their car disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the weight of years slide off my shoulders. David packed up the folder and turned to me. "That was brave," he said quietly. "You did exactly what you needed to." "Bravery," I said, "is just what's left when fear runs out." He smiled faintly. "We'll move forward with the charges. I'll contact you once the statements are filed. You should rest now." After they left, the house was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal, it was the clean silence after a storm, when the air still smells of rain and renewal. I walked to the window. Outside, the garden was scattered with petals from the rose bush Melissa had planted years ago. Some were crushed underfoot, others still clung to the stems, glistening. It struck me how much they resembled people. Some survive, some fall, and both are changed forever by the weather they endure. I sat down at the table and stared at the empty chairs where they had been. I felt sadness, yes, but not regret. Regret belongs to those who had a choice and didn't take it. I had taken mine. For the first time, the house felt like it was truly mine again, not a place of fear, but a witness to justice. When night came, I stood by the window once more, the city lights flickering in the distance. I whispered into the quiet, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." And I meant it. What had started as an act of survival had become something greater, a statement that no one, not even your own blood, has the right to steal your voice. That evening, I slept with the folder of documents beside me, not because I feared they'd return, but because it reminded me of who I had become, a woman who refused to be erased. After the arrests, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I believed that once the truth was exposed, justice would bring peace, but I was wrong. The days that followed were not filled with silence and relief. They were filled with a different kind of noise, a cruel, deliberate attempt to rewrite reality. People often say the storm passes when justice is served, but no one talks about the echo it leaves behind. It began 2 days after Melissa and Daniel were taken away. I woke to dozens of missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I finally answered one, a stranger's voice hissed, "You're a monster. How could you send your own daughter to jail?" Then the line went dead. By the time I hung up, another call came in, then another. The words were always the same poison dressed as pity. They called me demented, heartless, insane. I didn't understand how strangers knew about my private life until my neighbor Nora arrived at my door holding her phone, her eyes wide with concern. "Evelyn, you need to see this," she said. On her screen was a Facebook post shared hundreds of times. "My mother has dementia and falsely accused us of theft. Please, if you see her wandering, call us. She shouldn't be alone." Attached was a photo of me, taken from behind the curtains of my living room. The caption read, "She's losing touch with reality." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That picture, it was my window, my home. They had photographed me without my knowledge, twisted my story into something pitiful and grotesque. As I scrolled, I saw hundreds of comments from strangers. "Poor woman, she must be sick. How could a mother ruin her own child?" Each sentence was a dagger cutting into everything I had fought for. That night, I unplugged the phone. But the silence didn't bring comfort. A few hours later, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, 2 people stood outside, one with a clipboard, another holding a stethoscope. "We're from the wellness department," the woman said. "We received reports that you may be at risk." I stared at them, realizing what was happening. Melissa and Daniel were still trying to brand me incompetent, even from behind the walls of justice. "I'm fine," I said sharply. "I never requested an evaluation." They exchanged a knowing look, the kind people reserve for those they believe are lying to themselves. "We'll just take a few notes," the woman insisted, stepping forward. I blocked the doorway. "You can leave," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Now." When they finally left, I locked the door and slid to the floor. For the first time in years, I cried until my body ached. Not because of fear, but because I realized that truth alone isn't always enough. Some people don't need proof to believe lies. They only need a story that comforts their prejudice. Over the next few weeks, the harassment grew. I received letters slipped under my door, some filled with pity, others with hatred. "You deserve to be alone." one said. Even your daughter couldn't stand you. Another. You worked your whole life for nothing. One night, I found my garden vandalized, rose bushes uprooted, the word Lear painted in red on the fence. It wasn't just malice, it was strategy. They wanted to break me down until I became the woman they claimed I was: confused, unstable, defenseless. When I met with Attorney Ford again, I handed him the letters and showed him the posts. He sighed, his eyes dark with understanding. This is a common tactic, he said. They're trying to establish a narrative that you're mentally unwell to discredit your testimony in civil court. But it won't work if you stay composed and document everything. I nodded, but his words couldn't ease the exhaustion that lived in my bones. What do I do in the meantime? I asked. Live, he said simply. Live in a way that proves their story wrong. That night, I found myself drawn to a small wooden chest I kept in my bedroom. Inside were the things I'd saved from my mother, the same woman who had raised me when the world called her a fool for keeping a child out of wedlock. Among the yellowed photos and bits of lace, I found a letter she had written before she died. The ink had faded, but her words were still strong. Evelyn, never let anyone, no matter how close, take away your dignity. Love is not measured by sacrifice but by respect. If someone claims to love you yet destroys your peace, that is not love, it is control. I traced the words with my fingertips, tears falling freely. It was as if she had written it for this very moment. That letter became my anchor. I pinned it to the wall beside my mirror so I would see it every morning. Each day, I began to rebuild what they had tried to destroy. I changed my phone number, closed my social media accounts, and asked the police to install surveillance cameras. When I watered the garden again, I didn't see the vandalism, I saw soil ready to bloom. And I told myself, if they could spend months plotting my downfall, then I could spend the rest of my life building my freedom. But strength doesn't erase loneliness. Some evenings, the quiet of the house pressed against me like a weight. I would sit by the window, the same one they had used to take that photo, and wonder how a mother's love could become her own undoing. Yet even in those moments, something inside me refused to surrender. I realized that what terrified them most wasn't my supposed weakness, it was my will to stand back up. When the case reached the newspapers, the tide began to turn. Reporters contacted Attorney Ford for comment, and he released a single statement. This is not a case about family conflict. This is a case about the exploitation of an elderly woman who refused to be silenced. The truth began to move quietly, spreading through the same networks that had once spread lies. Friends who had doubted me began calling again, apologizing for believing the wrong story. And though their words didn't erase the damage, they reminded me that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. Weeks later, when I stood before the mirror wearing that same red suit, I saw a different reflection. Not a victim, not a villain, just a woman who had learned that survival isn't about avoiding storms but learning to walk through them without losing your footing. My mother's letter still hung beside the mirror, and I whispered to her memory, "You were right. Dignity is the only thing they can't steal." The calls eventually stopped. The posts vanished. The letters stopped arriving. But the lesson stayed carved inside me. Silence isn't always peace, and noise isn't always power. Sometimes, the quiet that follows a battle is the beginning of something greater, a life rebuilt not on what was taken, but on what refused to be destroyed. 3 months after that day in my living room, the case went to trial. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee, and every step I took down those tiled halls echoed with the weight of years of silence, of surrender, of believing that love would always protect me. Now I knew better. Love without boundaries is not devotion, it's self-erasure. As I sat in the waiting area, clutching my folder of evidence, I thought of all the women I had met at the senior center who whispered similar stories. The son who emptied their savings to help with the bills, the daughter who sold their homes to simplify things. Different names, same pattern, and I realized that my fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too. When the doors opened, the courtroom felt both immense and suffocating. I took my seat beside Attorney David Ford, who nodded to reassure me. Across the room, Melissa and Daniel sat together, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion. They no longer looked like the proud couple who once spoke of my confusion. They looked cornered. Their lawyer leaned toward them, whispering rapidly, his tone edged with desperation. The judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to read through lies like glass. His name was Judge Maxwell. I remembered him faintly from years before when I had cleaned offices in this very courthouse. Back then, I had walked these halls invisible. Now I was here to be seen. David rose first, presenting the evidence with surgical precision. The forged documents, the falsified report, the recording, the confession from Carla, the bank statements, and the medical verification proving my competence. Each exhibit landed like a hammer against the quiet room. At one point, Judge Maxwell looked up and said, "Mrs. Carter, you have been remarkably thorough." "I've spent my life cleaning up other people's messes, Your Honor," I replied softly. "I just applied the same skill to my own." A ripple of subdued laughter passed through the courtroom, but when Melissa took the stand, the laughter died. She trembled as she tried to explain herself. "We didn't mean to hurt her," she said. "We just thought she couldn't manage anymore. We were trying to protect her." David leaned forward. "By taking out a life insurance policy on her life and transferring her property into your name?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "It was Daniel's idea. He said it would help us keep the family home if something happened to her." Judge Maxwell's voice cut through the silence. "Did your mother show any sign of cognitive decline? Did any doctor other than the one you bribed suggest she was incapable?" Melissa shook her head. "No, sir." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Then let's call this what it is: exploitation. You didn't try to protect her, you tried to erase her." Daniel's lawyer attempted to object, but it was too late. The truth had already taken root in the room. The jury didn't need convincing. They needed confirmation. The documents provided that. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse. Melissa received 15 months of probation and mandatory community service in a senior assistance program. Daniel faced 3 years in prison for orchestrating the forgery and coercion. When the gavel struck, a sound like thunder rolled through me. Not triumph, not revenge, something purer: release. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months lifted. I looked at Melissa one last time. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't feel hatred anymore, only sorrow for what she had become. Somewhere beneath that broken ambition was still my child, but she would have to find herself without me now. Outside the courthouse, the reporters waited like vultures, cameras flashing. "Mrs. Carter, how do you feel?" one shouted. I paused, looking into the lens of one camera. "I feel free," I said simply. "And I hope this story reminds people that age does not make us helpless. It makes us wiser if we choose to act." The statement spread quickly, and soon newspapers began calling it the Carter case, citing it as a landmark example of elder empowerment. But I didn't care about headlines. What mattered was the aftermath, the quiet victories that followed. A week later, the district attorney's office called to inform me that my case had sparked a wider investigation into the county's property transfer system. 6 officials were dismissed for negligence or bribery. 12 other fraudulent guardianship cases were discovered, and each of those victims, once voiceless, finally had a chance to reclaim their dignity. The settlement reached with Melissa and Daniel's defense covered the stolen funds and damages. They repaid $8,750 plus $15,000 in restitution. The IRS investigation uncovered unpaid taxes in Daniel's company, amounting to $35,000. The cost of deceit had come full circle. They lost more than they had tried to steal. With the help of David, I rewrote my will. Every asset I owned, including my home and modest savings, would go to a charitable trust for elder abuse survivors. I named it the Golden Hope Foundation, after the yellow roses my mother once grew. I kept only enough for myself, a small apartment in a seniors complex overlooking the park. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and it was peaceful. Moving day came quietly. As the movers carried boxes labeled "Memories," I walked through the empty house one last time. I touched the walls that had heard both laughter and betrayal. "You can rest now," I whispered. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint scent of roses from the garden. The first night in my new apartment, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from gratitude. I made tea and stood on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer like distant fires. Somewhere, others were still fighting their battles in silence. I decided then that I wouldn't stop at surviving. I would help them find their voices too. The months that followed were busy in a way that healed me. With David's guidance, we organized free legal clinics for seniors. The first week, only 5 people came. By the end of the month, there were 50. Some brought folders like mine, others came with nothing but tears. I listened to every story, offering not pity but direction. For the first time in years, I felt purpose again. When the newspaper published a follow-up piece titled, "From Victim to Advocate, The Rebirth of Evelyn Carter," I smiled. They had missed the most important part. The rebirth wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who refused to let betrayal define them. Justice hadn't made me bitter, it had made me brave. It taught me that forgiveness and accountability can coexist, that you can wish someone peace while still demanding truth. One afternoon, as I filed paperwork for another survivor, I looked up at the framed photo of my mother on my desk. "You see, Mama?" I whispered. "Your lessons didn't die with you. They just took root in me." And as sunlight spilled through the window, warming my hands, I realized something profound. Justice isn't a finish line, it's a doorway. You walk through it carrying your scars, your memories, your truth, and on the other side, you find not revenge, but peace that finally belongs to you. A year passed before I realized how far I had come. Seasons had turned quietly, the world moving on as it always does, but inside me something had changed permanently, something that would never again bend under the weight of fear or guilt. My small apartment had become a sanctuary. Every morning began with the same ritual: a cup of tea, the sound of sparrows gathering by the balcony, and the soft rustle of papers from the Golden Hope Foundation. The walls that once seemed bare now held life photos of people who had come through our doors, faces transformed by justice, dignity, and the rediscovery of worth. Some of them had stories even darker than mine: a retired teacher tricked by her son into signing away her pension, a widower whose niece forged his signature on his deed, a grandmother confined to a care home under a false guardianship. They arrived trembling, ashamed, convinced they were alone, but they left knowing they weren't victims, they were survivors reclaiming their names. Each time I handed one of them their recovered property or a letter clearing their name, I felt something mend inside me too. It was as if every piece of their healing stitched back a thread of my own. In the evenings, when the foundation's office grew quiet, I often stayed behind, turning off the lights one by one. The reflection in the window no longer frightened me. The woman staring back wasn't the frightened mother who once clung to love that had rotted from the inside. She was the architect of her own restoration. Her eyes were older, yes, but steadier, anchored in truth, free from illusion. One afternoon, I received a letter postmarked from a women's correctional facility. The handwriting was familiar, uneven, rushed, but undeniably hers. Melissa. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands trembled as if holding a fragile piece of the past. When I finally unfolded the paper, the first line read, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that I see everything now." She wrote about the shame she carried, how she spent her days volunteering in the infirmary, caring for older women who reminded her of me. She said that every face she tended became a mirror of what she had done. "I used to think strength was about control," she wrote. "Now I know it's about humility." There were no excuses, no pleas for money or attention, just the quiet confession of a woman who had fallen into the pit she dug for someone else. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a small wooden box beside my mother's letter. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't mean erasing what happened. It meant no longer allowing it to poison me. I whispered into the still air, "I forgive you, but I will never forget." The words felt both heavy and light, like closing a door that had been left open too long. By spring, the foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. With help from David and a few volunteers, we opened 3 small homes for seniors who had lost everything to family exploitation. We called them Houses of Dignity. The day the first resident moved in, a retired nurse named Clara, I watched her unpack a single box of belongings and cry with relief. "I thought I'd die in that shelter," she said softly. "Now I have a place again." That night, I stood in the doorway of her new room as she fell asleep beneath clean white sheets, the sound of her breathing steady and peaceful. I thought of all the nights I had cried alone, and I knew that no pain had been wasted. As the months passed, letters began arriving from across the country, women and men sharing their own experiences, thanking me for giving them courage to speak. One woman wrote, "Your story saved my mother. She thought no one would believe her until she saw you on the news." I read those words aloud to myself, and for the first time, I understood the true meaning of legacy. It isn't money or property. It's the echo of your actions in the lives of others. On the first anniversary of the foundation, we held a small gathering in the garden behind the main office. The yellow roses, my mother's favorite, had just begun to bloom. Friends, volunteers, and survivors filled the space with quiet laughter and soft conversation. When I stood to speak, the sun slipped behind a cloud, and a calm breeze swept through the flowers. "A year ago," I began, "this was just a dream born from pain. But pain, when faced with truth, can become purpose. Every one of you here has proven that we are not defined by what was done to us, but by what we choose to do next." As I spoke, I noticed a young girl near the back, about 16, tall and shy, her hands folded tightly together. Later I learned she was Melissa's daughter, my granddaughter, sent with a note from the facility. "Please let her meet her grandmother." When our eyes met, I saw in her the reflection of everything that had once been broken and everything that had been rebuilt. She walked toward me slowly, uncertain, then wrapped her arms around me. I felt her heartbeat against my shoulder, fragile but real. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mom says you're the bravest person she's ever known." I didn't speak. I just held her. In that embrace, the years of betrayal and silence softened into something resembling grace. I knew we would never erase the past, but we could build something honest from its ruins. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the garden. The lanterns flickered, casting gentle light across the roses. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, the betrayal, the fear, the courtroom, the loneliness, the rebirth. I realized that every painful step had led to this moment of peace. My story had started with a voice recording that broke my heart. It ended with the sound of laughter drifting from a house I had built for others. Before going inside, I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Mama." The night air smelled of earth and salt and renewal. I understood, finally, that survival wasn't just about living, it was about living with purpose. The next morning, I woke early, brewed tea, and opened the window. The city was stirring awake. Somewhere below, the first bus hissed to a stop, and people began their day. I smiled, knowing that for once, I didn't dread the hours ahead. I was free, not in the way people mean when they talk about independence, but in the truest sense. I belonged to myself again. And as the sunlight spread across the room, touching the framed photograph of my mother and the letter from Melissa's daughter on the table, I whispered the lesson that had carried me through it all. It's never too late to begin again. Never too late to choose dignity over fear, peace over silence, truth over comfort. Then I took my first sip of tea, the warmth filling my chest, and began another day not as a victim, not as a survivor, but simply as Evelyn Carter, a woman who had learned that no betrayal could destroy the soul that refuses to stop believing in its own worth. When I look back on everything that happened, I no longer see my story as one of loss, but of awakening. Betrayal stripped me of illusions I had clung to all my life, the belief that love and loyalty are guaranteed simply because they share your blood. Yet it also gave me something far greater: clarity. I learned that peace does not come from avoiding pain, but from confronting it with courage and truth. What was once a tragedy became a rebirth, a turning point that transformed weakness into wisdom and silence into strength. In rebuilding my life, I discovered that justice is not the end of a story, but the beginning of healing. Every act of self-protection, every boundary drawn, was an act of love toward myself. The world often teaches women, especially older women, to endure quietly, to sacrifice, until there's nothing left to give. But endurance without respect is not virtue, it is imprisonment. Standing up for myself did not make me heartless, it made me whole. The most powerful lesson I carry now is that dignity is non-negotiable. It cannot be stolen unless you hand it over. The moment I chose to stop begging for understanding and started demanding accountability, my life began to shift. From that choice grew a community, a foundation, and a new sense of belonging not built on dependence or fear, but on mutual strength and compassion. Forgiveness followed naturally, not as permission for those who hurt me, but as freedom for myself. For everyone listening, this story is not only about betrayal, it's about reclaiming the authorship of your life, no matter your age or circumstance. We all reach moments when the people we trusted the most fail us. In those moments, remember this: the power they use to wound you is the same power you can use to rebuild yourself. Stand tall in your truth, even if your voice shakes. Set boundaries that protect your heart, and never confuse kindness with surrender. Healing begins the moment you choose yourself, not out of pride, but out of respect for the life you still have to live. Self-respect is the foundation of every form of love worth keeping. Apply it daily by saying no when something feels wrong, by speaking up when silence hurts, and by forgiving not to excuse others, but to free your own soul. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe that forgiveness always means reconciliation, or can it exist without rebuilding the relationship? Please share your thoughts in the comments below so others can learn from your perspective. And if this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel and support us so we can continue creating more meaningful stories that inspire strength, courage, and dignity. Your engagement helps us keep these voices alive.